So one of the things that I love about Scripture is that the meaning of its words, of its stories for us are not finally fixed, right? They often change with time and with life experience. Have you noticed that for yourself? How we understand God's love, how we understand what it means to follow Jesus. It's not just this simple, memorizable Sunday school answer, but something that is deepened and deconstructed and expanded and challenged and continually made new as we go through life, as we experience heartbreak, as we leave home and try to make a life for ourselves, as we navigate the challenges of relationships, of healing and repair, of becoming a parent or a grandparent, as we go through seasons of loss and grief, as we face the ways that our privileges or the lack thereof shape us. Right, as the centering quote in our bulletins this morning from James Finley reminds us, the greatest teacher of God's presence in our life is our lives. But as we go through life, we don't automatically become wiser, and I think this is a misconception, right? Aging does not make one wise. I know plenty of elders who cling to their bigotries and emotional immaturity, and I know plenty of young people who are wise far beyond their years. Wisdom results from an intentional journey. Right? It is forged at the intersection of life experience and deep, sustained reflection, and a willingness to be continually changed by this process throughout our entire lives till the very end. But here I want to lift up what I think is another common misconception, that we primarily think ourselves into new ways of living. That sort of I think, therefore I am kind of mentality, right? The French Enlightenment philosopher René Descartes famously put it for us. Right? That is what makes us fundamentally human. Our mind, our brain, that's what separates us from all other creatures. It's also, I think, deeply shaped the way that we understand Christianity as primarily an affirmation of beliefs, of ideas. And the spiritual journey primarily being an intellectual journey, right? You want to understand Jesus and faith? Read a book, talk about it, take a class, debate it, argue it. That's how we engage it. And to be honest, in many ways, I too assumed at least a great deal of this without realizing it. So when I first came across that quote, the other centering moment quote from Richard Rohr, that we do not think ourselves into new ways of living, we live ourselves into new ways of thinking. My gut reaction was, what? No. I don't think that's right, is it? What does that even mean? But it's one of those lines that sticks with you. At least it did me, and it continues to agitate you. What the heck does that mean? Because there seemed to be something profound in it, something countercultural, something spiritually wise, even if at first I couldn't perceive what that was. But you see, the challenge, I think, is that for most of us, like the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 7, our scripture passage from a couple of weeks ago, right? We get stuck in living out certain patterns, certain habits, certain cycles. We keep doing that same thing over and over again. That thing, even though we don't want to keep doing it, we wish we could stop, and yet we find ourselves doing it. The same argument, the same blame game, the same wars justified by the same dehumanizing logic. That is, our life experiences, they don't actually transform us. They simply create well-worn ruts that we can't seem to get out of. It's like the mere repetition creates entrenched neural pathways in our brains and such familiarity in our bodies that we get stuck. We can't seem to find our way out as much as we might like to. Like those who grow old but fail to become well-seasoned, or who grow in years but have long since plateaued in wisdom, we keep having life experiences, but we lack so often the courage and the resolve to do the other half of the work that's necessary to grow or to heal, to be born again, to be made new in the language of our faith. We don't do the deep, sustained reflection. And therefore, we don't inhabit this willingness to be continually changed by the process throughout the course of our lives. In 1986, Richard Rohr, who gave us again that quote earlier, that we live ourselves into new ways of thinking, he left his Franciscan community to start what he visualized as a school for prophets. And in 1987, the Center for Action and Contemplation was born in New Mexico. Our main intention, he says, reflecting back, was not really to found a community so much as to gather people who had a vision of service to the world and to be a place that trained them, that made them qualified for this work. That is, it was to give people the tools, the framing, the training to become more attuned to their everyday lives, to the world around them. And so that instead of running from our reality, as so many of us do so much of the time, right? Instead of numbing ourselves to it because we're so overwhelmed, instead of living in denial because we are too scared of what we'll find and what it will ask of us if we were to face it, how do we learn, how do we develop the capacity to be present enough to and through our lives such that we can allow our lives to transform us rather than to just keep doing that same thing over and over? And this is why I keep coming back to our stewardship theme for this year, becoming a school of love. That just as the Center for Action and Contemplation emphasizes, we need not merely action in our world devoid of ongoing reflection and change. As we know, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions, and such is the justification for every war. And we can also no longer settle for a spirituality that is devoid of action, that is simply about comforting us, or that reduces action to easy charity. What our world needs, what I believe we here at Federated can uniquely offer our little corner of it, is a community built around sustained action, around building relationships across differences, and navigating change, navigating those differences, and that as we do that, we allow one another to inform and challenge and disrupt and inspire and remake us. We allow this process to deepen and deconstruct and reconstruct and expand our understanding of God, of what it means to follow Jesus, and ultimately to become more fully human. Very different than most churches, right, who sort of tell you this is the way that we do it. This is the way that if you want to get plugged in and connected, just find your place, know your role, and do it. But don't challenge it. Don't try to change it. How different this is as a fundamental assumption. Right? The assumption in this process is that we are called to perpetual growth. We are called to continual change. So we need not resist it. But we do this not just for change's sake, but for the sake of love, in the direction of love. We do not think ourselves into new ways of living from the safety of a couch or even of a pew. We get involved in life so that we can live ourselves into new ways of thinking. And it's here that I want to return us to this morning's scripture reading from the Gospel of John. Jesus, knowing that one of his disciples will betray him, would hand him over to the police for a small bribe, knowing that one of his dearest friends, who would go on to become, quote unquote, the rock on which the church was founded, Peter, would emphatically deny even knowing him 3 times. Knowing that the rest of those people gathered around that table that night would flee him in his greatest hour of need, would at best watch from a safe distance. Still, Jesus loved them to the end. Was he hurt? Was he disappointed and perhaps angry? I think so. You've heard his cry in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? God, let this cup pass from me. Maybe show them another way, Judas, Peter, right? His agitation with his disciples when they keep falling asleep while he is in this deep agony. This love that Jesus offers us, that he models for us, that he calls us to be students of and stewards of, it's not sentimentality. It's not really even about liking everyone. It is a commitment to honoring the dignity, the humanity of others, even when the going gets rough. It is a refusal to return violence and neglect with violence and neglect at a personal and collective level. And so even as Jesus knew where the road before him was headed that night, he got up from that table and he took on the role reserved for slaves in his society. He washed their feet. Can you imagine the tender tenacity of such love washing over them in all of their vulnerability, claiming them right there in the midst of all of their imperfections? Right? Peter is so uncomfortable with this, perhaps knowing full well how fickle his own heart is, how feeble his own will be that night. Peter is so uncomfortable with this revolutionary expression of love that he says, no. Stand up. You are not washing my feet. That's beneath you, Jesus. Peter, Jesus says, unless I wash your feet, you can have no share with me. That is, you cannot live out this kind of love. You cannot be a steward of this revolutionary, enemy-refusing love that utterly confounds the world. You cannot understand it unless you have first experienced the power of it claiming you. You can't merely read your way to it. You can't talk your way to it. You can't understand your way to it until you are finally willing to open yourself in utter vulnerability to being loved precisely where you carry the deepest shame and grief and hurt. You cannot know what it is to love others as I am loving you. And that is what I am calling you to. So this morning, before I go any further, I ask, have you let the love of God wash over your dirty, bunioned, calloused, warty feet? Right? Have you let the love of God wash over you? Forgive those things that you have done in your past that continue to haunt you, that you struggle to forgive yourself for? Have you let the love of God whisper in your ear that you are good already, that you are enough, that you are worthy? Makes you squirm a little bit, doesn't it? You can understand Peter's response. Not in spite of your imperfections, but knowing them full well. May this morning be the day that you finally begin to breathe this love into your lungs. Similarly, for most of us, we get content to profess things with our mouths, like God is love, right? We all believe that. Love your neighbor, while failing to actually be in deep and sustained relationship with our neighbors. Maybe with the ones we like or who are like us, but not those ones we disagree with. Surely Jesus didn't mean that. Not the ones who practice a different religion or none at all, who come from other cultural backgrounds, who carry different histories in their bodies. Surely not them, Jesus. But if we are living in a bubble of homogeneity, we prove that living in that bubble while saying things like God is love and love your neighbor, we prove that we neither understand nor are living the love to which Jesus calls us. This fierce, revolutionary kind of love, the only love capable of breaking our cycles of blame and dehumanization and violence, this love cannot be lived out at a safe distance from those who don't live or act like us, from Palestinians, from Israelis, from those who have been incarcerated, from those who are houseless, from those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex. It cannot be lived out at a distance. To paraphrase the great liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, you cannot love the poor if you cannot even name them. We are called not merely to profess God's love, but to live it and to be changed by it as we do. And at the same time, we are called once again to begin not by seeing ourselves as Jesus, as those taking this love to others. We are first to see ourselves as Peter and the disciples, as those in need of being loved back to life. And therefore, recognizing that Jesus comes to us, puts us in that uncomfortable place, in the disguise of any one of our neighbors who offers it to us. Jesus comes to us with that love. And it is from this place that we are continually sent out to love likewise. If you're not letting yourself receive it, you are not living the love to which Jesus has called you. In this season of stewardship, may we each consider what we have to offer, not merely for the building up of our ministries, for keeping the lights on or anything else around here, but what do we have to offer so we may build a community that reflects God's glorious vision of diversity and thus become a school of love, a center for action and contemplation, drawing us ever deeper into the love which God calls us, and then sending us back out into the world to live it. May it be so for your healing and flourishing, for the healing and flourishing of all the world.